Welcome to this video on why study Hegel. So I thought I'd drum up a few reasons of why anyone would be interested in this philosopher. So I have here 5 reasons I think why Hegel might be interesting to you. So let's kick off. The first reason is what I call the opening of thought. So there are various ways in which we can close ourselves to thinking. And this might sound critical and provocative, and in part that's a little bit of part of the point. So we have various different ways today in which you can close yourself to thought. So meditation, engaging in substance philosophy, Buddhism, self-help, habit programming, religion, etc. and so on. The point with all of these, I think, is that you are taking your own thinking as a kind of object out there, right? You're distancing yourself towards with who you are. And what Hegel is doing in his philosophy is that he is bypassing all of that and taking thinking head on, right? So he is trying to think, well, what is really going on when we're thinking? Because it shouldn't be something that we need to observe or look at from the outside, because we're already within it. It's already in and through us. So we just need to focus on what's going on there. And it turns out this is a hell of a lot more difficult than what it seems like. And but this is really what animates Hegel and what he's after. So he really wants to understand the unity of self-consciousness, like Kant and Fichte and Schelling. So Hegel takes up that tradition, which is really going all the way back to Plato and Aristotle, right? They want to understand what's going on around them, but also what's going on when they're thinking about those things that's going on around them, because that is also involved. That is really what is opening up our understanding of what's happening all around us. So first point is that Hegel is really tuned in to this, to thinking, and he'll try to make that explicit according to the terms of thought itself, right? Not by thinking in terms of something out there, because immediately you're turning thinking into a thing, and you've lost sight of the thing you wanted to look at. Second point is Hegel is giving us a developmental philosophy. A way to put this is that every determinacy, everything we think of as something hard, fast, and solid, turns out to be just moments onto themselves, we might also like to put it. So we like to get stuck in fixed constants, patterns, laws that are just simply absolute, that are just there. And when you ask somebody, well, why is it like that? Well, it just is like that, right? It just becomes like a default given. Or that you have to envision some sort of crude Platonic realm in which all of these supposed laws and rules just inhabit. But Hegel will show that all of these things, these determinacies, these specificities, things that stand out to us, that are made intelligible, are moments of self-thinking concept or self-consciousness, ultimately, so logically. Now, that doesn't mean that all of this stuff is just a reductionist, eliminativist, subjectivist, constructivist. Hegel is not all about that, right? He is emphatic that there really is a real book that I'm holding here, and it's there's a phone here that has certain rules and laws to it that we are materially manipulating in order to make it work the way it works. So Hegel is all for that, right? But he also is wanting to show us that there is still more at work that is being taken for granted. And if we really want to know what's going on, then we should be looking at the infinite that is at work here, right? So the phone doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It is driven by human desire, what is human desire ultimately driven by, right? So Hegel will want to say, well, it's a kind of a search for itself. So another thing to add to this is So Hegel is famously regarded as the first philosopher who sort of makes history explicitly part of his thinking. And while it's right that history becomes important for Hegel, it's not that history alone drives development. It's rather that we think in developmental terms, and so history becomes a lens through which we see things develop in empirical reality in time. But Hegel's science of logic, for example, is not a historical development. It is a development, but a logical development. So it's not that his developmental philosophy presupposes history, it's that history presupposes developmental philosophy. It's the other way around. Right, so third point is what I call Elenchus 2.0. Which is going back to the Socratic method of engaging in dialogue with your opponent or interlocutor. And what Socrates is really doing, right, is he's trying to zero in on a common point they have, and then unpack that common point, right? He isn't interested in presenting his fully fledged argument and then just break down the other person's convictions. He thinks there's a much better way, and that is just start from the position of your interlocutor, of your opponent. And in a way, Hegel does this exactly, but he does it instead of dramatizing it in dialogues, he simulates it in text, in thoughts, and so. The example here would be we go about our world having various different assumptions and presuppositions, and Hegel would want to take those in sequential turns and show, well, what's really going on here, right? So if you ask, somebody might hold that what is most real is what is most obviously immediate and given, right? There's no more evidence needed there. And then Hegel will go about asking, well, what is at work in this kind of thinking if you take the sensuous certainty to be immediately true? Right? He thinks there's more to the story, but he's going to try to show that from within that position and not introducing any extra terms or anything from the outside, because then you have kind of contaminated the position. And so you're no longer critiquing the thing you started to critique, right? Because you've put these other things into it. And moreover, it's just, I think, a rhetorically bad move, because you add all of these other things into that position or that person who holds a certain assumption or conviction, what have you, or a certain perspective. But they're not going to go along with what you present them. They can just flatly deny it. And what do you then do? All right. So Hegel, very much inspired by Socrates, here, that you take the position of what you're trying to critique, and you do it from on their own territory, on their own terms. And so this is often called immanent critique, and yeah, I find it's very powerful. So fourth reason idea is that Hegel is really geared towards reality and towards what works. So he has this really pragmatic and practical element to it, right? So Hegel, like all great philosophers, is interested in what is most true, right? What is most concrete, what is actual. So metaphysics, ontology, thinking about thinking in terms of pure concepts, essences, and so on, all of these things prepare the way to understand nature and our own social dimension. How we all behave vis-a-vis each other, what we think is the good life, what are the good values to have, and so on and so forth. So this does not mean that the former does not have any independence or value in of itself, right? You can go along thinking about metaphysics all your life. But in terms of what is actual, what is most true, or what is the truth, it becomes a shadow compared to the embodied minded activity that we engage in historically, right? Which is what you might say really is casting the light to begin with. So Hegel shows how this is developed systematically, and so from the pure universality of logic, his science of logic and so on, to its embodiment in history. And I mean then how we think about ourselves in philosophical terms, because Hegel is still gonna try to make intelligible what is truthful to us as far as philosophy is concerned, right? So that's why the embodiment of this becomes the philosophy of spirit, or philosophy of human-minded activity. So all that to say, metaphysics is still true, but it's the purest truth, as one of my teachers used to say. And then we might add, but what is real is not pure. It is concrete, right? It is woven together of many different elements. And that's something that, proves to be maybe a limit to philosophical thinking. Okay, but that doesn't stop us from trying. Lastly, I want to highlight the encyclopedic freedom in systematic thinking, right? So Hegel eventually builds out a system of his philosophy. He doesn't just randomly go from this topic to that, but he wants to show how they all are connected, and not just connected in a top-down sort of symmetrical way, but how they are interwoven with one another and come to support one another in a developmental manner, almost like an evolution of thought, right? Except it's not an evolution in time or history, but an evolution of logic. I think Anton Koch wrote a book called The Evolution of Logical Space, so that might be a good place to look closer at this. So I thought I'd just bring out some points from the philosopher Collingwood, who was one of the British idealists, and he just encapsulates really well the common objections one might have to system or systematic thinking, to building systems in philosophy. So I'll just run through these very quickly. So one first objection is like, oh, it's a finality, right? Once you've made a system, you've put a period on the things, and it stifles any more growth and development. Well, Collingwood thinks that actually systems become stepping stones towards finding new frontiers. And so it's not that systems are hostile to, so it's not that systems present us with finality, but they are rather the means by which we open up new avenues of knowledge, of deeper knowledge, of more profound thinking. And so, if anything, systems are like the shortcut to getting to what's really most concerns us. The second objection is completeness, right? There's no way that a system can capture all the myriad details of what's going on in our world and all the little particularities and the phenomena, right? You can't really capture all of that in a system, and that's not really what a philosophical system or even a scientific system is trying to do. It's trying to organically integrate, to put things together in a way that makes sense, which leads into the response, the third response, which is rationality and the principle of the whole, right? It isn't just, the system itself isn't just randomly making a list, right? It has some sort of principle that is at work through every step of the way. And this is, I think, really a beautiful thing about the system, that you have a principle that is at work through every step of the way. And particularly in Hegel's way of doing it, he shows you how this principle is developing and growing through these steps. Because at the very beginning, if we're being radically presuppositionless, we don't even have the principle. We don't even know what a principle is. So we have to start with what is just most immediate, and then see where that leads us, see what that turns into, if it turns into anything whatsoever. So this is also a response to the objectivity of a system that so the third objection, so I'm going a little bit back and forth here, but the third objection is that systems profess to be like fully objective, that there is nothing subjective about them. But that's not really the case, because, and that's not, especially not what the philosophical system professes, because it is put together according to some principle, and Hegel even admits that he himself is the product of a tradition, of a certain discipline in thinking. And so no philosophical system, and maybe not even a scientific one, it professes to be something completely independent of its authors. No, it's with the authors, it's with their own history and background and so forth. But that doesn't negate the objective elements of that system, right? And the last objection is that there is some sort of necessary unity or a master formula that is kind of plunked down on the independent and fragrant details of phenomena and what's going on there in reality. And so system is kind of like, putting on a stamp on these things and forming things according to its initial principles, which were ready-made. Well, this cannot be the case for Hegel, because he doesn't start with anything ready-made. He is so radical in his systematic thinking, well, that the system itself has to develop, has to be demonstrated imminently, and this becomes supremely difficult to do. But this is, I think, what Hegel is trying to embody or develop through his systematic thinking, so that instead of it becoming this master formula that is just clamped down on phenomena, it becomes a sensitivity to what's going on with the phenomena and the things that are ultimately concerning us. So when you read Science of Logic by Hegel, or even the Phenomenology or any of his texts, he's very sensitive to the movements of the form, the movement of the frame, what kind of perspective is at work here, right? He never takes that for granted, because the form is part of the content and the content is part of the form. So there is an overlap here between the two. So the idea of a philosophical system, to quote Collingwood, nowhere is finally and completely realized. It is always tending to realize itself, and wherever any diversity is recognized in the subject matter and methods of thought. So I would just want to add to that this doesn't mean there's any kind of definitiveness to systematic thinking, right? So Hegel is going to present arguments regarding essence, form and content, concept, art, aesthetic experience, politics, what is a state. He's going to give us what he thinks is a definite answer to those things, but it's a definite answer according to the logic that is thinking through his circumstances, his historical circumstances, and in his time, right? And so he writes at one point, Hegel writes, "Bis hierher ist das Bewusstsein gekommen," which means here is where self-consciousness has arrived, where it has come, right? And I can't speak of anything beyond that. 200 years later, where has self-consciousness gone to? Where has self-consciousness gone to today, right? Where is it arrived? Maybe thinking systematically can help us bring greater clarity to where self-consciousness has arrived to today, right? Where it is now. Because I think that, like with the quote here from Kant, this is, I think, only to our benefit, because we are already implicitly systematically thinking as self-conscious creatures. Philosophy tries to make that explicit to ourselves, and therefore make explicit what is really going on in our nature and in our experience and in our thinking and in our society and so forth. So I hope that was interesting to you, and please leave comments below if you think there are better reasons to study Hegel. There are other reasons one might get interested in Hegel. There is a lot of things one can bring out, but here are just 5 things I thought that are, for me, particularly pertinent when I think about Hegel and what his philosophy can offer us today. So thanks very much for listening in, and you have a great day.
Hegel, I got to have you, 'cause I need you so bad. Hegel, I got to have you, 'cause I need you so bad. Well, I'd like to lie beneath some stars with you, but I know you'd Schopenhauer late like you always do. So I say, Hegel, I got to have you, 'cause I need you so bad. Hegel, I got to have you, 'cause I need you so bad. I dig a